The Great Pyramid wasn't built to impress you. Neither was Machu Picchu. These structures were built to survive something we forgot happened, and the people who made them knew you would forget. Right now, under 400 feet of ocean, there are cities, not small villages, cities, with engineering that would challenge us today. They're sitting on continental shelves that used to be coastline, and every major civilization on Earth has a story about what put them there. But here's what's strange. They all say the same thing happened, and they all say the same beings warned them it was coming. I've spent months analyzing evidence that doesn't make it into textbooks, not because it's been debunked, but because accepting it would mean rewriting everything we think we know about who built civilization. What I found suggests we're not the first advanced culture on this planet. We're not even the second, and whoever came before us left a message encoded in stone, waiting for the moment when we'd be smart enough to read it but desperate enough to need it. Let's start with a question nobody wants to answer. How did people who never met, separated by oceans they supposedly couldn't cross, build the exact same impossible things? I'm not talking about similar, I'm talking about identical, same techniques, same mathematical constants, same astronomical alignments, down to the degree, sometimes down to the arcminute. The standard explanation is independent invention. Different people, different times, same solutions. That works for simple things. Fire, wheels, basic tools, but it falls apart when you're talking about encoding the exact value of pi into the geometry of a pyramid, or aligning structures to true north with an accuracy of 12 arcseconds, which is a precision that rivals what we can do with laser surveying equipment today. Independent invention doesn't explain why the Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun, the Great Pyramid of Giza, and the Yangling Mausoleum in China all point to true north with an error margin so small you need specialized equipment just to measure the deviation. We're talking about an accuracy of 0 degrees, 0 minutes and 12 seconds. That's 37 meters of deviation per 100 kilometers. You try doing that with a stick and a shadow. And it's not just pyramids. There's a construction technique called polygonal masonry. You've probably seen it. Massive stones, irregular shapes, fitted together so precisely that you can't slide a piece of paper between them. No mortar, no cement. Just stone on stone with joints so tight they've survived earthquakes that destroyed everything built around them. This technique appears in Peru at Sacsayhuaman. It appears in Egypt at the Valley Temple. It appears at the foundation of Osaka Castle in Japan. It appears in the walls of the Acropolis in Greece, places separated by oceans, cultures with no documented contact, time periods spanning thousands of years, but the technique is identical. The precision is identical. Even the weird quirk where they leave knobs on some of the stones, like handles, those appear in all these places too. The probability of that happening independently approaches 0, and yet that's what we're supposed to believe. Or take the golden ratio, phi, 1.618. It shows up in the Brihadiswara temple in India, in the Parthenon in Greece, in the Great Mosque of Kairouan in Tunisia, in structures built by Pueblo people at Mesa Verde. Same irrational number, same application, same recursive patterns where each level of the structure maintains the same proportional relationship to the whole. Now you might be thinking, well, maybe the golden ratio is just naturally pleasing to humans. Maybe we all discovered it independently because it occurs in nature. Okay, but these aren't approximate. These are precise mathematical applications that require you to know the decimal expansion of an irrational constant and then encode it into stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons. The Pueblo people at Mesa Verde are supposed to be a pre-literate culture, hunter-gatherers transitioning to agriculture, and somehow they're implementing golden ratio geometry in their sun temple that matches what's being done in temples on the other side of the planet by civilizations with centuries of mathematical tradition. That's not independent invention, that's a curriculum. And before you think this is just cherry-picking coincidences, wait until you see what's encoded in the dimensions of these structures. Because it's not just math for the sake of math. They're encoding the size of the Earth, the speed of light, the precession of the equinoxes, knowledge that we supposedly didn't have until the age of satellites and atomic clocks. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before we talk about what they encoded, we need to talk about who they were. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Part 1. The impossible precision. Let me show you something that doesn't make sense. In the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, there are stone vases. Thousands of them. They're from the pre-dynastic period, which means they're older than the pyramids, older than the pharaohs, older than the civilization we credit with making them. These vases are carved from diorite, basalt, and granite, materials that rank between 6 and 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. For context, your kitchen knife is about 5.5. These stones are harder than steel, and they're not just carved. They're carved into shapes with walls so thin you can see light through them, with internal geometries that would be impossible to create even with modern drill bits because you'd need to reach inside a narrow neck to hollow out a wider internal chamber. Now here's where it gets interesting. Someone did a metrological study on these vases using 3D scanning technology. They sliced the scans into 101 sections and measured the symmetry. The deviation from perfect circular symmetry in the best examples was 0.0013 inches. That's 33 micrometers. To put that in perspective, a human hair is about 70 micrometers thick. These vases are symmetric to within half the width of a human hair. In granite, carved thousands of years before were supposed to have had any technology beyond copper chisels and stone hammers. When they compared these to vases made by modern craftsmen using hand tools, the handmade vases had deviations 10 to 100 times greater. When they compared them to vases made on a modern precision lathe, the ancient vases were only slightly less precise than what a computer-controlled machine can produce today. Here's what that means. Whoever made these Class 1 precision vases had technology that we can only barely replicate with computer-controlled machinery. And then that technology vanished. The later Egyptian dynasties tried to copy these vases and failed. They had to switch to softer stones like alabaster because they couldn't replicate what someone before them had done in granite. This is the opposite of how technology is supposed to work. You don't start with CNC-level precision and then lose it and never get it back for thousands of years. Unless something happened. Unless someone who knew how to do this disappeared and took their knowledge with them. And this pattern repeats. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, there are H-blocks carved from andesite with flat surfaces accurate to within 10 micrometers across spans of several feet. That's precision-ground optical flat territory. You need temperature-controlled rooms and laser interferometry to verify that kind of flatness. We found it in blocks sitting in the Andes Mountains, attributed to a culture that supposedly didn't have the wheel. At Baalbek in Lebanon, there are 3 stones in the temple platform that weigh between 800 and 1,000 tons each. They were quarried from a site 900 meters away, transported, lifted, and placed with such precision that the joints are nearly invisible. The largest crane we have today can lift about 20,000 tons, but it's a fixed installation. It can't travel. These stones were moved almost a kilometer and lifted 20 feet off the ground. And before you say, they used ramps and thousands of workers, the math doesn't work. To move a 1,000-ton stone up even a modest incline, you're fighting friction and gravity in ways that don't scale linearly. The amount of pulling force required would need ropes that don't exist in nature and anchor points that could take millions of pounds of tension. But let's forget the how for a second. Let's talk about the why. Why would anyone build like this? Why over-engineer everything to absurd degrees? Why make things that last 10,000 years when your civilization might not last 1,000? Unless you knew it wouldn't. Unless you knew something was coming. And you wanted to make sure that when it was over, when everyone who knew what you knew was dead, there would still be something left. Something so massive, so precise, so impossible to ignore that whoever came after would know. would know that someone was here, someone who understood things that would take the next civilization millennia to relearn. That's not architecture, that's a time capsule, a message. And if you think I'm reading too much into stone blocks, wait until you see what they wrote down, because they didn't just leave buildings. They left records, texts, king lists, genealogies, and the beings they describe as their rulers weren't human, at least not in any biological sense we'd recognize. Part 2. The non-human rulers. The Sumerian king list is one of the oldest written documents we have. It's inscribed on a clay prism that's currently sitting in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford, and it's not mythology. It's presented as a straightforward administrative record, a list of kings who ruled, where they ruled, for how long. Here's what it says. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. Descended from heaven, not established by humans, not earned through conquest, descended, installed from somewhere else. Then it lists 8 kings who ruled 5 cities before a great flood, and it lists their reign lengths. Alulim, the first king, ruled for 28,800 years. Alaugr ruled for 36,000 years. Enmanluana ruled for 43,200 years. The 8 kings combined ruled for 241,200 years. Now the standard academic response is to dismiss these as symbolic or exaggerated, but here's the problem. After the flood, the king list continues, and the reign lengths become shorter, more human. Etana rules for 1,500 years. Then we get kings with reigns in the hundreds of years, then decades, then spans that match what we'd expect from human biology. So we're supposed to believe that the same scribes who accurately recorded post-flood kings with reasonable reign lengths suddenly decided to add 6 zeros to the earlier kings for no reason. That they understood years and decades, but forgot how to count when it came to the pre-flood period. Or we could consider that they recorded what they were told. That there were rulers before the flood whose biology or existence wasn't bound by human limitations, and that those rulers transferred power to human kings after the flood, leading to the gradual decline in reign length that the list documents. And before you think this is just a Sumerian thing, look at Egypt. The Turin Royal Canon, another king list, does the same thing. It dedicates entire columns to god kings and spirit beings who ruled before the first human pharaoh. It even includes a transitional category, what they called the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus. 10 rows of spirits who acted as intermediaries between the divine rulers and the human dynasties that followed. In India, the Vedas and Puranas describe the same pattern. The earliest ages, the Yugas, are populated by Devas and Asuras, beings with lifespans that stretch across millennia. In China, legendary emperors with supernatural characteristics ruled for impossible lengths of time. In Mesoamerica, Viracocha and Quetzalcoatl are described as non-human civilizers who brought knowledge and then left. This isn't isolated mythology. This is convergent testimony across cultures that had no contact, all describing the same thing. A time when Earth was governed by beings who were not human, beings who had knowledge and technology that humans didn't, and all describing a transition point where those beings transferred power to human rulers and then disappeared. Emotional hook, make it personal. Think about that for a second. Every major civilization on Earth has a story that says, we didn't invent this, someone taught us. The Sumerians say the Apkallu, fishmen from the Abzu, taught them writing and agriculture and law. The Egyptians say the gods built the first temples and showed them how to maintain mad cosmic order. The Indians say the Saptarishi, the 7 sages, brought the Vedas. The Mesoamericans say Quetzalcoatl brought mathematics and the calendar. These aren't creation myths. These are civilization myths, stories about who taught us to be civilized. And in every case, the teachers are described as coming from somewhere else, teaching for a period, and then leaving or disappearing. Now you can interpret this 2 ways. Either every culture independently invented the same myth about non-human teachers because it's psychologically comforting to attribute knowledge to gods, or they're all remembering the same thing, an actual period when someone else was here, someone else who had answers, and who left before we were ready to survive without them. Part 3. The Global Guild. Here's where it gets harder to dismiss as mythology, because whoever these rulers were, they left a signature, a calling card, repeated symbols and techniques that appear globally with no explanation for how they spread. There's a symbol you've probably seen and never thought about, a handbag. Sometimes it's a bucket. It appears in the hands of the Apkallu and Assyrian reliefs from Mesopotamia. It appears on the T-shaped pillars at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is 11,000 years old. It appears in the hands of Olmec and Mayan deities in Mexico. Same object, same way of holding it, same context, shown in the hands of beings who are bringing knowledge or gifts to humanity. Now, what are the odds that people in Turkey, Iraq, and Mexico independently came up with the same symbolic object and decided it represented divine knowledge? What are the odds they all depicted it the same way? Or take the master of animals motif. It's an image of a central figure grasping two confronted animals, usually lions or bulls. It appears on the Pashupati seal from the Indus Valley. It appears on Sumerian cylinder seals. It appears on the Jebel El Arak knife from Egypt. It appears in Northern Europe. Same composition, same meaning, a representation of the power to control nature, to bring order from chaos. These aren't universal archetypes that emerge spontaneously. These are specific iconographic formulas being transmitted across cultures, which means there was contact, or there was a source culture that both influenced others or was remembered by them. And here's the thing, these symbols aren't just pretty pictures, they're markers, badges of office, because every culture that has these symbols also has the precision architecture, also has the astronomical alignments, also has the flood myths. It's a package, a complete system being deployed globally. And that brings us to the question nobody wants to ask. If there was a global system, a worldwide culture or authority that had this knowledge, where did it go? What happened to it? The answer is written in geology, and it's brutal. Part 4. The Cataclysm. About 12,800 years ago, something hit Earth. We're not talking about a localized disaster. We're talking about a cosmic impact event that rewrote the climate and geography of the entire planet in a matter of decades. The evidence is everywhere once you know what to look for. There's a layer of sediment dated to exactly this period that appears at sites across 4 continents: North America, Europe, the Middle East, and in this layer, there are things that shouldn't be there. Nanodiamonds. These form under extreme pressure and temperature. You find them at meteor impact sites. They're scattered across this layer in concentrations that indicate something exploded in the atmosphere with enough force to rain diamonds down on a third of the planet. Platinum spikes. Platinum is rare on Earth's surface, common in asteroids and comets. This layer has platinum concentrations hundreds of times higher than normal. That's a chemical signature of extraterrestrial material being distributed across the planet's surface. Melt glass. Spherules of rock that were heated above 2,200 degrees Celsius, hot enough to vaporize stone and then have it condense into glass beads as it cooled. You find this at nuclear test sites. You find this at the Chicxulub crater where the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs hit. And you find it in this layer 12,800 years ago. Shocked quartz. Quartz crystals with fracture patterns that only form under the sudden extreme pressure of an impact or explosion. This is diagnostic evidence. It doesn't happen naturally, and it's in this layer, at over 50 sites, across 4 continents. Then there's the black mat, a layer of carbon-rich sediment that represents the sudden burning of massive amounts of biomass, forests, grasslands, entire ecosystems going up in flames at the same time. The distribution suggests that approximately 10% of Earth's land surface experience simultaneous combustion. That's what happens when something explodes in the atmosphere with enough energy to ignite vegetation across entire hemispheres. The shockwave alone would have flattened everything for thousands of kilometers around the impact sites. The atmospheric heating would have ignited wildfires that burned for months, and the amount of dust and soot thrown into the atmosphere would have blocked the sun. We call what followed the Younger Dryas, a 1,200-year return to near-glacial conditions. Temperatures dropped by 10 degrees Celsius in a matter of decades. The ice sheets that had been melting started growing again, and every megafauna species that had survived the previous ice age went extinct. Woolly mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, giant ground sloths, gone. The Clovis culture in North America, one of the most widespread and successful populations of the time, vanished. Not gradually, abruptly. Their sites stopped showing signs of occupation right at this boundary layer, right when the nanodiamonds in melt glass and shocked quartz show up. Try to imagine what that would have been like. You're alive 12,800 years ago. Let's say you're part of an advanced coastal civilization. Your cities are built on river deltas and coastlines because that's where resources are, where trade is, where life is easiest. One day the sky catches fire. Something explodes above the ice sheet in North America with the force of millions of nuclear bombs. The shockwave circles the globe. Within hours, the sky is filled with debris. Burning fragments rain down. Forests ignite. The temperature spikes. And then it drops, because so much ash and smoke is in the atmosphere that the sun is blocked for months. Your crops die. The animals you hunt starve or flee. Your coastal city floods as massive chunks of the ice sheet, destabilized by the impact, slide into the ocean. And this isn't a movie. There's no government coming to help. No food aid. No rescue. You either survive or you don't. Most don't. The few who do survive are scattered, traumatized, focused entirely on finding the next meal. And within 2 or 3 generations, everything your civilization knew, every technique, every piece of technology, every carefully preserved bit of astronomical knowledge, it's gone. Because you can't pass down precision stone cutting when you're struggling to find food. You can't maintain universities when your cities are underwater. And here's what makes this so haunting. They knew. The ones who built those impossible structures, they knew this was coming. How else do you explain the obsessive over-engineering? The megalithic construction designed to survive any earthquake. The stone blocks too heavy to be moved by floods. The mathematical constants encoded in geometry that would survive even if all written records were destroyed. They were building time capsules, encoding knowledge in the most durable medium possible, stone. And they were building them all over the world because they knew that whatever was coming would be global, that coastal cities would be lost, that libraries would burn, that most of humanity would die. So they built things so massive and so precise that whoever survived, whoever came after, would find them and wonder, would be forced to ask the question, how did they do this? And in asking that question and studying these structures, future humans would discover what was encoded, would relearn the mathematics, would rediscover the astronomy, would piece together that someone came before, someone who knew things, someone who tried to warn us. Part 5, The Survivors. And we can track what happened after. Because about 11,600 years ago, right when the Younger Dryas ends and the climate stabilizes, there's a sudden explosion of monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, 11,000 years old, T-shaped limestone pillars, some 5.5 meters tall, weighing 10 tons, arranged in circular enclosures with sophisticated bas-relief carvings, built by people who were told were hunter-gatherers, people who supposedly hadn't invented agriculture yet, people who had no business organizing the labor and resources required to quarry and transport and erect these stones. Unless they weren't inventing, unless they were remembering. Look at what they carved on those pillars. Animals, symbols, geometric patterns, and handbags. Those same handbags that appear in Sumer and Mexico. They're at Göbekli Tepe, which means whoever taught the Sumerians was also here, or whoever built Göbekli Tepe had knowledge from the same source. Then Jericho, one of the oldest continuously inhabited sites on Earth. And what's the oldest structure at Jericho? A massive stone wall, 12 feet high, 6 feet thick, built 11,000 years ago. Hunter-gatherers don't build walls. Walls are defensive. Walls imply you have something worth protecting, or you know something is coming. And the wall at Jericho isn't just big, it's sophisticated. It has a tower. The tower is 28 feet tall, internal stairs, built from stone blocks that had to be shaped and fitted. Why would you build a tower if you're a small hunter-gatherer band? Unless you inherited the knowledge that towers are important. That height gives you warning. That walls save lives. This is what I mean by orphans. These people at Göbekli Tepe in Jericho, they're not inventing civilization. They're rebuilding it. They're survivors or descendants of survivors of the Younger Dryas cataclysm, trying to piece together fragments of what their grandparents or great-grandparents knew. And they're doing it in stone because someone taught them that stone survives. Remember, I said these structures encode the size of the Earth and other constants. Let's talk about that now, because this is where it goes from strange to impossible to dismiss. The Great Pyramid of Giza. If you take its height and multiply by 43,200, you get the polar radius of Earth. If you take its perimeter and multiply by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of Earth. Why 43,200? Because that's the number that falls out of precession math. The Earth wobbles on its axis. One full cycle takes about 26,000 years. That's 1 degree of movement every 72 years. And 72 times 600 equals 43,200. So whoever designed the Great Pyramid knew about precession, knew the dimensions of the Earth, and encoded both into the structure at a scale that would preserve the information even if all other records were lost. But it's not just the pyramid. At Angkor Wat in Cambodia, the entire temple complex is a scale model of the cosmos. The moat around it is exactly 216 meters wide. The central tower represents Mount Meru, the axis of the world, and the whole structure is rotated exactly 0.9 degrees off cardinal north. Why? Because 0.9 degrees is one gradient. And when you map the temple using gradients instead of degrees, the mathematics align perfectly with precessional cycles. This isn't accident. This isn't numerology where you search for patterns until you find something. This is intentional encoding of sophisticated astronomical and geodetic knowledge into permanent structures. And here's the kicker. The latitude of the Great Pyramid is 29.9792458 degrees north. The speed of light is 299,792,458 meters per second. Same numbers, down to 6 decimal places. Now you can say that's coincidence, that they just happened to build at that latitude and we just happened to define the meter in a way that made this work. Except the meter was supposed to be defined as 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the equator to the North Pole, which means the meter is based on the size of Earth, and the pyramid encodes the size of Earth. So the fact that the latitude in degrees matches the speed of light in meters per second means whoever built the pyramid understood the relationship between Earth's dimensions and the speed of light. That's not Bronze Age technology. That's not even modern technology. That's something else. And this is what we lost. This is what the cataclysm took from us. We think we're so advanced. We think we're the pinnacle of human achievement. We put rovers on Mars and we sequence genomes, and we think we're the first ones to really figure things out. But someone before us could encode the speed of light into the latitude of a pyramid, could cut granite vases to tolerances we can barely match with computer-controlled lathes, could move 1,000-ton blocks and fit them together so precisely that water doesn't seep through the joints 4,000 years later. We didn't invent civilization. We inherited it. We're not the pioneers. We're the orphans, handed a legacy we barely understand, trying to reverse engineer knowledge from ruins and myths because the instruction manual burned when the libraries flooded and the teachers died when the ice sheets collapsed. Every mathematical constant we discover was already encoded in temples thousands of years old. Every astronomical cycle we observe was already being tracked by people who supposedly didn't have telescopes. Every engineering technique we innovate is just us finally figuring out how the ancients did things we still can't replicate. We're not standing on the shoulders of giants. We're crawling through their ruins, piecing together fragments, calling it progress. So who were they, the ones who came before? The texts call them by different names: Apkallu, Anunnaki, Devas, Elohim, the Shining Ones, the Seven Sages, but the descriptions are consistent. Beings with knowledge beyond humans, teachers, administrators, engineers, beings who understood genetics because that's what the Mesopotamian texts claim. That Enki, the god of wisdom, created humans through biological manipulation, mixed the blood of a god with the clay of the earth. Which sounds like mythology until you realize that clay, wet earth, is rich in minerals and organic compounds, and blood carries genetic material. They're describing genetic engineering in the metaphorical language available to a Bronze Age scribe. The Hindu texts describe Vimanas, flying machines, with technical specifications. The Ramayana gives dimensions. The Mahabharata describes their capabilities, how they could travel vast distances, how they were powered. The Samarangana Sutradhara dedicates 230 verses to aircraft construction, takeoff procedures, navigation, protection from storms. Why would an ancient culture invent detailed technical specifications for aircraft unless they were describing something real? And before you say, ancient astronauts, this is pseudoscience, consider that the alternative is independent invention. That people in India and Mesopotamia and Egypt and Peru and Japan all independently invented the same construction techniques, the same mathematical constants, the same astronomical alignments, and the same mythology about non-human teachers. That they all happen to encode the same information in stone. That they all happen to describe a global flood at the same time. That they all happen to have the same iconography. The probability of that is zero, which means there was contact, or there was a source, a unified culture or authority that operated globally, and whether that authority was human or non-human, terrestrial or extraterrestrial, what matters is that it existed, that it had knowledge we lost, and that it disappeared in a cataclysm that we're only now understanding. The missing chapter. Here's what mainstream archaeology won't tell you. There's 10,000 years of human history we know almost nothing about. From the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, to the beginning of written history around 3000 BCE, we have almost no records. A few scattered settlements, some cave paintings, basic pottery. And then suddenly, around 3000 BCE, we get the Sumerians and the Egyptians showing up with written language, mathematics, astronomy, law codes, monumental architecture, and complex theology. Fully formed. That's not how development works. You don't go from hunter-gatherer to city-state in a few centuries without a transitional period, unless that transitional period was erased. Unless the development happened before 12,000 years ago, was wiped out by the younger Dryas, and what we see at 3000 BCE is a recovery, a rebuilding using inherited knowledge. And this explains so much. It explains why the Sumerians say kingship descended from heaven instead of emerging from tribal leadership. It explains why the Egyptians attributed their knowledge to the gods of the first time. It explains why every pyramid-building culture says they were copying even older structures. It explains why we find precision artifacts mixed with primitive tools, why we find impossible engineering in the earliest layers. Because the earliest layers aren't the beginning, they're the rebuilding after an ending. What the myths really mean. The flood myths aren't about a local river overflowing. They're about the world ending, and they're remarkably consistent when you strip away the cultural specifics. A global catastrophe, divine warnings given to select individuals, instructions to preserve knowledge and specimens, a vessel or refuge, righteous people chosen to survive, and then a restart, a new age, with the survivors tasked with rebuilding and remembering. The Mesopotamian flood story from the Epic of Gilgamesh, the biblical account of Noah, the Hindu story of Manu, the Greek story of Deucalion, the Inca flood traditions, Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime stories about rising seas, Native American accounts of a world consumed by water and fire. They're all describing the same thing. A cataclysm that killed most of humanity, rose the seas hundreds of feet, and destroyed every coastal civilization. And in every case, there's an authority figure giving warning. Someone or something that knew it was coming, that had time to warn, that tried to ensure some knowledge survived. In the Sumerian version, it's Enki who warns Ziusudra. In the biblical version, it's God warning Noah. In the Hindu version, it's Vishnu as a fish warning Manu. Different names, same structure, same message. This is coming. You need to prepare, save what you can. What if those warnings were real? What if there was a group, an authority that monitored cosmic threats, that knew when a comet was coming, that couldn't stop it but could try to save a remnant of humanity and its knowledge? The mythology would describe them as gods because what else would a Bronze Age human call beings with that level of knowledge? But the function is clear. They were trying to prevent total extinction, trying to ensure that after the cataclysm, humanity would have a seed population with some memory of what came before. And they partially succeeded, because here we are, we survived, we rebuilt, we retained fragments of the knowledge encoded in myths and monuments, enough to eventually claw our way back to asking the right questions. The warning. But here's what keeps me up at night. If they encoded knowledge in these structures, if they went to such extraordinary lengths to make sure future humans would find their work and wonder, then they weren't just creating a legacy. They were sending a warning. Because the knowledge they encoded isn't just abstract math and astronomy. It's practical. It's telling us about cycles, about precession, about how the Earth moves through space in patterns that repeat, about how the solar system periodically passes through debris fields that increase impact probabilities. The Younger Dryas impact happened 12,800 years ago. A full precessional cycle is 26,000 years, which means we're about halfway to the next one. And if there's a periodicity to these events, if the Earth passes through cosmic debris on a regular schedule, then whoever comes 13,000 years from now might face the same thing, might watch the sky catch fire, might see their civilization wiped out in a matter of days. Is that why they built these monuments? Is that why they encoded this information? Not just to say we were here, but to say this happened and it will happen again. Think about it. If you knew your civilization was about to be destroyed and you wanted to warn the future, what would you do? You'd build something so large and so precise that it couldn't be ignored. You'd encode the most important information you had. The shape of the Earth so future humans would know you understood the planet. The precession cycles so they'd know you understood deep time and cosmic patterns. The speed of light so they'd know you understood physics at a fundamental level. And then you'd hope. You'd hope that when the next civilization rose, when they finally got smart enough to decode what you left behind, they'd realize what you were telling them, that this has happened before, that it can happen again, that they need to watch the sky. That's not a time capsule. That's a warning label, a message that says we didn't see it coming until it was too late, but you can if you pay attention. The choice. So here we are. Standing in front of monuments we can't explain, holding artifacts we can't replicate, reading texts that describe rulers we're told couldn't have existed, looking at geological evidence of a cataclysm that coincides exactly with a global myth of destruction. finding the same knowledge, the same techniques, the same symbols across every continent. And we have a choice. We can keep pretending this is all coincidence, that humans independently invented advanced mathematics, precision engineering, and global coordination half a dozen times without leaving any transitional evidence, that the flood myths are just metaphors, that the king lists are just exaggerations, that the precision vases were made with hammerstones, that the megalithic construction was done with rope and ramps, that the astronomical encoding is pattern matching. Or we can accept the simpler explanation, that someone was here before us, that they had knowledge and technology we're only now beginning to understand, that they tried to warn us, and that we're the inheritors of a legacy we almost lost completely. The inheritance, the orphan angle I mentioned at the start, it's not just a metaphor. We really are orphans, adopted children of a civilization that died giving birth to ours. Every myth about gods teaching humans is a distorted memory of a real event. Every temple encoding mathematical constants is a fragment of a curriculum we were supposed to learn. Every impossible structure is a testament to capabilities we don't have anymore. And the trauma is encoded too, in the flood myths, in the stories of destruction and fire, in the obsessive building of monuments designed to survive apocalypse. We inherited their fear along with their knowledge, the fear that it could happen again, that the world could end, that everything could be lost. That's why every culture has a creation story that's really a recreation story. Why so many myths start with the world being destroyed and then remade. Because that's what happened. The world that existed before 12,800 years ago was destroyed, and the world we live in now is what grew from its ruins. We're not the apex of human achievement. We're the recovery. We're still climbing back to where we were, still trying to decode the instruction manual left in stone, still trying to remember what our predecessor parents knew. And maybe that's okay. Maybe recognizing that we're part of a longer story, that we're rebuilding rather than building for the first time, maybe that changes how we see ourselves. Maybe it makes us more humble, more willing to look at evidence that doesn't fit our narratives, more willing to consider that there's knowledge we lost and need to relearn. Because if they could do it, we can do it. If they could encode the speed of light in latitude and carve granite to CNC tolerances and move 1,000-ton blocks and survive a global cataclysm and still manage to pass knowledge forward, then we can too. We're standing on the shoulders of ghosts, building with blueprints written in stone, remembering a history we thought we'd forgotten, and maybe, just maybe, preparing for a future that rhymes with the past. The pattern. Here's the pattern: rise, peak, cataclysm, fall, survival, recovery, rise again. We're somewhere in the recovery phase, maybe approaching a new peak, but we're still a long way from where they were. We're still trying to figure out how they cut the vases and moved the blocks and encoded the knowledge. We're still mapping the underwater ruins on continental shelves, finding cities that are supposed to be impossible. We're still excavating sites that keep pushing the dates back, finding sophistication where there should only be primitives. Every new discovery makes the orthodox timeline harder to maintain. Every precision artifact found in an early context. Every astronomical alignment that requires knowledge we're told they didn't have. Every flood sediment layer that matches the younger Dryas boundary. Every shared symbol that spans oceans. The evidence is piling up, and at some point we're going to have to rewrite the textbooks, admit that we got it wrong, that humanity's story is longer and stranger than we thought, that we're not the first, that we're not alone in deep time, that beings with capabilities exceeding ours walked this planet tens of thousands of years ago, that they built, that they knew, that they tried to warn us. And when we finally accept that, when we finally integrate this evidence into our understanding of history, everything changes. Our sense of who we are, our sense of where we came from, our sense of what we're capable of. Because if they could rise from nothing and build wonders we still can't explain, what's stopping us? If they could encode knowledge that survived 12,000 years of erosion and catastrophe, what should we be encoding? If they could see a threat coming and at least try to prepare, what threats aren't we seeing? The responsibility. We're the custodians now, the inheritors of their legacy and the authors of our own, and we have a responsibility, not just to figure out what they left us, but to make sure we don't make the same mistakes. Because they didn't survive not as a civilization, their cities drowned, their libraries burned, their knowledge fragmented and evolved into myth. They built monuments that lasted, but the culture didn't, the people didn't. We need to do better. We need to make sure that if something happens, if another impact event or climate shift or whatever cosmic threat is waiting in the dark happens, we're prepared. We need to make sure our knowledge isn't concentrated in formats that can be destroyed. We need to make sure we're monitoring the sky. We need to make sure we're asking the right questions. And we need to finish decoding what they left us. Because if they encoded warnings, we need to know what those warnings are. If they encoded knowledge, we need to relearn it. If they encoded patterns, we need to recognize them. The monuments aren't just tourist attractions. They're documents, encyclopedias written in stone, and we've been staring at them for centuries without realizing they're trying to tell us something. But now we're starting to listen. Now we're starting to ask the right questions. Now we're starting to see the patterns. And that's terrifying and exciting at the same time, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you realize that the standard narrative doesn't fit the evidence, you can't go back to accepting it. Once you understand that someone came before, that we're part of a cycle, that knowledge was lost and is waiting to be recovered, you can't stop looking. You can't stop wondering what else is out there, what else is buried, what else is encoded, what else we've forgotten. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the monuments were designed to do exactly this, to make us curious, to make us dig, to make us question. Because a curious civilization is one that survives. A questioning civilization is one that adapts. A civilization that learns from the past is one that has a future. Conclusion: bringing IT home. So let me bring this full circle. The Great Pyramid wasn't built to impress you. It was built to outlast you, to be there when your civilization is dust, to hold knowledge through whatever comes next. And what comes next is up to us. We can ignore the warnings. We can keep pretending we're the first and best. We can keep dismissing evidence that doesn't fit our timeline, or we can accept that we're part of something bigger, part of a story that spans tens of thousands of years, part of a cycle of rise and fall and rise again. We can be the generation that decodes the message, that learns from the ruins, that bridges the gap between what was and what could be, that finally understands what our predecessor parents were trying to tell us. Because they left us everything they could. They encoded their knowledge. They built monuments that would survive millennia. They created symbols that would transcend language. They did everything short of writing us a letter saying, "This happened, learn from it, prepare for it, don't make our mistakes." And that letter might actually exist. We just haven't found it yet, or we found it and haven't decoded it, or it's encoded in something we're looking at right now without understanding. But we're getting closer. Every new scan of ancient sites, every new analysis of impossible artifacts, every new geological study of impact layers, every new pattern recognized in ancient structures, we're getting closer to understanding what they were, what they knew, what they tried to preserve. And when we finally piece it all together, when we finally read the message written in stone and encoded in myth, we're going to realize something profound. We're not alone, not in the sense of aliens visiting, but in the sense that humans have always been more capable than we thought, that our ancestors, biological or cultural, achieved things we're still trying to match, that knowledge doesn't just progress forward, it can be lost and recovered, that civilization is fragile, that cataclysms are real, that the past is warning the future. And that warning is simple: watch the sky, preserve knowledge, build to last, And remember that this has happened before and it can happen again. The non-human empire that ruled every continent wasn't aliens. It was us, a version of us, maybe biologically different, maybe just culturally so advanced they seemed like gods to the survivors, but us. Human or proto-human or post-human or something we don't have a word for yet. And they fell, and we rose from their ruins, and someday maybe we'll fall too, and whoever comes after will find our ruins and wonder. But if we're smart, if we learn the lesson they tried to teach, maybe we don't have to fall. Maybe we can break the cycle. Maybe we can be the first civilization that sees the threat coming and doesn't just warn the future, but prevents the catastrophe altogether. That's the real message of the monuments. Not we were great, but we failed, do better. And we can. We have their knowledge encoded and waiting. We have their warnings carved in stone. We have their example, both their achievements and their destruction. We have everything we need to be the generation that finally gets it right. The question is, will we listen? If this changed how you see the past, subscribe because we're just getting started.